I have. But it's a good guy, dealer is. But
Yes,
yeah.
indeed.
Right, let's start at the beginning. What's your gaming history? How did you first get into gaming then? Your first memories.
Yeah, so bloody hell, so a long while back. So when I was a kid, obviously, I'm one of two lads. So I've got a brother. My dad bought us consoles in kind of early days. So I think we had like an Atari original. I can never remember what the model is. Like a 2700 or something. I need to double check. So proper early doors, like playing Pong and stuff, and then we moved quite quickly into kind of Acorns, and then an Apple, and then kind of BBCs, Amigas, you name it. We had all kinds. So obviously on the BBC Micro and stuff was just playing around with like early coding and stuff. My uncle was kind of into computers at the time as well, and then moved up in the console. So we were fortunate because there were two of us. We kind of split what we wanted. So we got like a Master System and a NES, and then we got a SNES and a Mega Drive, and we always kind of asked for the other console so we could play. So we just it was just that really, and then PC gaming took over, and that's when I really got into like the original Doom and used to like multiplayer by using old bloody like printer cables, from one PC to another. It was like before networks and stuff. So serial cable.
Yeah, I remember at school, I knew nothing about computers or anything, but I remember one day what I called the boffins that were computers, they all hooked up all the computers and were all playing Half-Life? It might have been. Could you do that?
Yeah, you could in the day. Yeah, Half-Life. Well, Doom was my first multiplayer experience with serial cables. Then we moved to like X-Wing versus TIE Fighter. And on PC, I was really into like Falcon 4, which was like a flight sim. So I got into PCs that way and computers, and then I started building them myself before people even remotely built home PCs, because a mate of mine was basically like helping out in the school that I was in, and he was helping IT out, and then we started like building machines and stuff. So I think from that age, I was into games, I was into tech, and then when I left school, I didn't really go on to like higher education in terms of like university and stuff. I kind of I'd had enough of education and I wanted to just work basically. So I was into design and stuff at that time. And I started off as like a CAD operator, so like a trainee CAD operator, designing like 2D offices and stuff. Yeah, it was. Yeah. So I was doing these like 2D drawings and stuff, converting them into computer. And I remember one day going into HMV. So HMV in the UK, for any US listeners, is like it's a music, games. Yeah, it's like a multiple entertainment shop, isn't it? Which has gone down the pan a bit now because like digital has kind of slowly killed it. But in Liverpool, they had this it was like one of the biggest HMVs in the UK, and it was across like 3 stories. It was this huge like building, and Psygnosis were in there one day, and they were showcasing Wipeout. So they're showcasing the first Wipeout on big screens, and there was a few designers and whatnot in there. And me and my brother went in, played some Wipeout, and I was just kind of hooked. And like these guys were. Back then, I mean, this was probably 90 or something, 91, 92, whenever Wipeout was kind of being showcased. And, you looked at these guys like they were kind of rock stars and stuff. I think game designers and developers then were driving around in Ferraris and all kinds if they were lucky. So it was like a really interesting time. And I was I was blown away by it. And I just wanted to get into the industry from then. Sent a kind of speculative letter to Psygnosis, got brought in for an interview, and originally I started off in QA like a lot of people did back then. So I was like a tester, and then I moved quite quickly into technical testing. So testing all like the PC stuff, PC rigs and compatibility testing. So it was during like early Wipeout. It was Discworld 2, Crazy Ivan, G Police, you name it. It was all those kind of like early cool, Psygnosis games, Destruction Derby, etc. And then just as I joined, Sony had bought Psygnosis.
Did that? Okay.
Yeah, so they purchased Psygnosis and obviously started looking at turning them into like a like a PlayStation studio. And then a job came up for a design in F1, and I live and breathe motorsport. I absolutely adore like Formula One and motorsport. Went for the job, obviously had the knowledge of the sport and got the job there. And then that was when my journey through like development started. So I started off as like a junior designer, then led some of the F1 series, then started working on Wipeout.
Wow.
And then, worked on all kinds of games, like went over to Sony Paris and stuff to help them with like Adidas Power Soccer and stuff like that in the early days.
Yeah.
And then, ended up in Guerrilla Games, Killzone 2, came back to do a bit on Wipeout, and then we were doing other concepts. And then, the studio, it was in about my 14th year, Studio Liverpool basically got disbanded. And pretty much all the devs got laid off at the time. So a whirlwind express tour of like me getting into games, and then obviously my Sony journey. But obviously we can go into some detail about bits and bobs of Sony when later on if you want.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's an interesting history. It's how you actually got in, and you wrote a letter, and they you got a job out of it. That's pretty
well, they
cool
rejected
story,
it first. So they rejected my first letter and said, "We'll keep you on file." And I thought, that's just a nice way of them saying thanks, but no thanks. And then 4 or 5 months later, they reached out to me and said, "We've got some jobs. Do you want to come in for an interview?" So it shows that it's worth sending a letter to places if you're interested. And obviously, if they say they'll keep you on file, then hopefully they will.
Yeah, no, that's really good. That is. So obviously, you say you're a games designer. What does that actually entail? Is it like character design, world building, or is it specific areas you do? Like say for instance, F1. Were you the guy that just made the cars, or is it helping the whole game, or is it specific areas? Is it?
Yeah, so it's quite broad game design. So obviously you've got like level design, and you've got level designers may do like scripting and stuff like that, or you've got your traditional game designers, and some places nowadays will blur like a game designer with like a game director, depending on the development house. But essentially, if you take F1, I was there was me and a handful of other designers. I was looking at kind of AI, car handling. I was doing commentary scripts. I was recording commentary. You're obviously doing UX UI kind of. You're working with like an artist on UX UI, making sure that things are kind of easy to navigate, user interface, etc. And then I was doing like replay cameras. Different like game mechanics. So one of our F1 games, I introduced like this pit stop mechanic where like all of the 4 tires would be on L1, R1, L2 and L2 and R2. So you do like the 4 shoulder buttons to change the tires. You press
so it's quite. They allow you to get involved in changing the creative process of the entire game. Then just with games mechanics, yeah. If you put something forward. If it works.
Yeah, or if that's your position. So obviously as a lead designer, it's slightly different in terms of you're obviously making decisions, you're writing design documents, but you're also kind of managing a team, and I always used to say like game design was almost like, 70% documentation writing, you would do a good 10% of, people managing, and obviously like 10% of hands-on and so on and so forth. So it's not, a lot of people had a misconception that you just kind of sat there and brain farted like a load of ideas and people just made it or whatever.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
There's
a lot more to it.
It opened my eyes a bit because you know how obviously we've had Xbox acquisitions. Everyone thinks games have just fall out their arse overnight. So my friend VJ, I don't know if you heard of him, he suggested I watch a documentary called Raising Kratos, the making of God of War.
Oh yeah.
And that really opened my eyes to how difficult and hard and painstaking it really is. Game development. It's not as simple as it seems. And I know that was a tiny little sugar-coated thing, but I remember when they put all that hard work in and basically PlayStation came in and said, we don't like it. They were gutted. They were,
Yeah, because you have to please your stakeholders and stuff. So, we went through a period. So after Killzone, we went through a period where we were doing game concepts. And the problem with game concepts is if you don't get through the green light process, and this is ultimately the demise of like Studio Liverpool with a few other things that happened at the time. But if you don't get through the green light process, you're effectively 80 odd developers sat there not making any money because you're moving through like a cycle of concepts, and then the concept get rejected. You go through a cycle of like more concepts, and you've got like 2, 3, 4 concepes on the go, and you've got like mini teams and stuff trying to make things happen. But obviously, if the stakeholders turn around and say, we don't want to make another Wipeout, obviously we as Studio Liverpool had lost the F1 license, or we didn't lose it. It's just Sony didn't want to like rebid to it. And then it went to Codemasters, and then you get caught in like a concept cycle then, and ultimately the board and the powers that be in Japan, they'll just look at the studios and go, who's selling, what are the costs, who's selling, who's making money, and if you get caught too long in a concept cycle, then you're essentially just a studio full of people that are costing money but not delivering anything, so you're not making that money back. And Sony kind of used to go through annual cycles anyway of like reducing staff counts and stuff anyway. London would get hit, Cambridge, Manchester got shut down. So that always kind of happened, and I think each year you always kind of waited to see whether you were going to get like an envelope, which is not like a good feeling if you're in the middle.
No, it's not. No.
Yeah, if you're in the middle of a project which isn't launched yet, then you were pretty much safe. But if you were kind of in a fringe team or a team where the project had launched and you were kind of moving on to the next one, then you were always a bit worried that you would be the collateral in that regard. And Sony lost a lot of talented developers throughout the UK. And obviously business is business, and you need to kind of like cycle, or you need to kind of keep staff counts down. But it can be brutal sometimes. And then you've also got, like in any industry, you've got big kind of characters, you've got big egos, you've got people like disagreeing, then you end up having kind of like infighting between what features should we do, what features shouldn't we do. So we didn't have any of that nonsense which is going on now, like all sexism stuff and all of that.
It must be really difficult to make a game now, because no matter what you do, someone will find something wrong with it, or there'll be a hate campaign against the game. Because people have got to remember, games are games. They're meant to be an escape from reality.
Yeah.
But now people want every game to be politically correct, and everything has to be accurate. Everything. It doesn't have to be. It's meant to be fun. It is. Games are.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, we used to get... I was going to say, we probably could have got away with more. Well, we did get away with more back in my day. But I mean, even we couldn't really have like big crashes and stuff in the F1 game, because like Formula One management would say, well, we don't want to see, we don't want a game, depicting drivers getting injured. And we were like, well, what if we show like the drivers getting out of the car? And then you'd just be back and forth in this like argument of, well, just don't show a crash anyway. And you're like, well, it's part and parcel of like the sport. So you'd have all these kind of arguments. You couldn't have fire. It's like, we can't have fire. Full stop. The like, no chance you wouldn't be able to have like engines on fire and stuff. So you get caught, especially when you work with like a license. You get caught in some political decisions. I think that'll have eased a bit. Obviously, crashes and stuff. You can have crashes to a certain degree. But yeah, you get caught in a lot of things, and there's a lot of disagreement. There's a lot of, as I say, there's a lot of kind of egos and personalities that clash, and you've got to work to kind of make sure that doesn't consume the rest of the team and the job gets done at hand. So it can be difficult. And then the other thing for me is like, as I got towards the end of my 14 years, and Sony was shut down. So I had conversations with Ubisoft in Canada, EA.
Okay.
So I had conversations with like a lot of different studios. I was looking at relocating, but I just kind of wanted a bit of a change at that point. Then I think I'd be so ingrained in games. The other thing it does, it kind of removes your enjoyment of games because you kind of live and breathe it so much throughout the day. The last thing you want to do is kind of go home and play a game again. So,
yeah, see, I have heard this because obviously, I don't know if you spoke to VJ before. He's worked in many facets of the games industry for 25 years. He's not in it anymore, and he said that because he's also got. I've spoke to his friend as well. He don't even play games anymore. He said he said. When you've been in the industry, a lot of people, when they leave the industry, they end up not playing video games anymore because they were in it and they were behind the scenes, and it's like obviously it's a job, but a lot of developers want to get some of them get out of it because you've been in it for that long. They just don't like playing games. In the end, some of them. I'm not saying all developers like that, but I can imagine that because you're in the industry. It's hard, you know what I mean? Or was it's
the problem is you look at a game differently. So you can't help look at it as a developer. So you kind of look at, and you end up inadvertently kind of going, "Oh, I would have done that differently, or I would have done this," and you're not being an arsehole about it, But it's just ingrained in your head because that's what you're doing, kind of, throughout the day. And sometimes, you're working 10-hour days, 12-hour days, should you wish. And I'm not talking about crunch and stuff. I'm talking about, a lot of people volunteer and stay in the office and crack on and stuff because you enjoy doing what you're doing. And we pulled some all-nighters and all kinds, and obviously got fed for it. And you'd have a kip. You go to sleep in one side of the room while people are working in the other, and then you have a couple of hours rest, and then you crack on again. But that wasn't forced upon us. That was just people trying to use extra time to make the game better. But I think, you inadvertently, I suppose if you were, if you were a mechanic, you would, or you build cars, you would get in a car and go, "Oh, I would have put the switches there," or whatever. It's just, it's just like anything. You can't help it. But I used to love games. I love games now, but I used to love games, and then I went off them when I was a developer. It's because
you took the magic away. That's why you took the magic away.
You don't get to see. You don't get to see the finished article. You get to see the mess, throughout, and sometimes you'll build the end of a game before you build the beginning. So you've got.
Really? That's quite interesting.
Okay. So you'll be looking at a game and you'll be finishing and you'll be seeing what the end game is, and you might be balancing that, and then you build a bit at the beginning, and you build it in different chunks, or the team split up, builds in different chunks, and you're in charge of certain levels or this, that, the other. So by the time you get to it, you've obviously got loads of friends and people who are kind of wanting to jump on. So if we take Killzone, for example, people just wanted to play multiplayer. They were like, "Oh, it's out now. Let's play multiplayer and this, that, the other." And I just didn't want to touch it. We'd played it for 2 years, and everyone's finding it out and enjoying it, and you're just bored of it, And then it's kind of hard to, it's hard to motivate yourself in an annual cycle as well. So when you're doing F1, 2002, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6, it's hard to, because you've got such a short development cycle, you then have to kind of stagger. So say you finish 2003, you work on 4 and 5, and you try to do the bigger things for 5. But then you only end up getting the time to make small changes, and then you have people saying, "Oh, all you've done is put new cars in, and you've not really done," and you kind of try to explain that it's just time. So you can't get away from the lack of time. That's the problem. So it can be it can be tough at times, yeah.
Oh no, I can imagine, because it's the same concept. So you got F1 every year, football games every year, and to most people, the game looks obviously to you can tell, but to a lot of gamers, they're not massive upgrades. I mean, did you? Well, obviously when you were doing F1, each year was there a lot of change, or was it literally the same game, just a little bit added? Or was there quite a lot of changes?
No, it was time. And I mean, you were kind of forced into a couple of things. So, like, the major things that would happen is if they would introduce new circuits, you obviously got new car liveries and cars. So your art teams had to do those. You were doing new commentary, but you were kind of recycling old commentary, but you'd have to go and have commentary sessions again to, like, record new driver names and stuff. And then you'd obviously add a bit more because you were like, oh, we were missing this, or we were missing that. And you were trying to add things. I mean, we started adding like career modes and stuff like that, but not to the extent of like Breaking Point that like Codemasters have got now, where they've got a much bigger team and they've been able to like create animated cutscenes and stuff like that. So a lot of those ideas like we wanted to do, but it was just the team wasn't really big enough to achieve that.
Well, you
so I think, you just get caught in cycles, really. Obviously, it was a welcome break moving over to Killzone. And Killzone 2 was a slightly different situation because obviously Sony had not long bought Guerrilla. I think Guerrilla were kind of in like the second or third year of like Killzone. And then that was not like a slight or anything on anyone at Guerrilla. I absolutely love the guys and girls at Guerrilla. But obviously Sony had spent a lot of money and they just wanted that game out. And they just started, it started to slip and they started to chuck like, Cambridge were working on it as like an art studio, asset studio. Liverpool were working on it. A good chunk of us got sent over. Some were like AI programmers, myself. On the design team, they had no one on the kind of vehicle physics and stuff, for like the tanks and the jeeps and all that. And that was all done. That was all done with like Havoc, physics engines and stuff. So I went in and started setting up the vehicles, and then you obviously start working on balance and set up AI vehicles and stuff. So I think at one point there was hundreds and hundreds of people working on like Killzone across Europe. As I say, great studio. I was fortunate enough to work with some great developers. Obviously, Herman brought me in. He obviously running Griller, so I got to work under Herman and meet him. And he's obviously a great person. I've got a lot of respect for Herman. So that was like a welcome break. Obviously, I had to get acclimatized to like living in Amsterdam, moving away from like family and stuff at the time. So it was like a brilliant time, but it was also tough. I mean, during my time at Guerrilla, I think I did, it must have been like over 150 odd flights. I was flying in on a Monday, flying home on a Friday, and then staying in an apartment in Amsterdam for the week, and then flying back in Monday and just doing that over and over again. And then sometimes if I had holidays booked off, I'd fly home on like a Wednesday, and it was just insane. And then you start to realize, how much money, and that's all on Sony's checkbook. And then you start realizing how much money Sony are paying. We had like expenses because you obviously get expenses for like living in a different country. You've got an all expenses.
Okay.
Yeah, so we had an all expenses paid apartment in Amsterdam. A lot of the developers in Guerrilla lived outside Amsterdam because it was expensive. So we lived in like a really nice like townhouse, me and one other guy, Larry. He was an AI programmer, a good friend of mine. And so you're looking and you're thinking, so that's what, €2,500 a month for that apartment. we're getting like €50 a day allowance. Your flights are, anywhere between 50 and £100, like a flight. And then you start adding that up and saying there's like 15 people in Amsterdam from Liverpool. There's 10 or 15 in there from Cambridge. So you start to like think, how much is that as a project cost Sony? And obviously you can see why Sony wanted that kind of released as soon as they could.
Oh yeah, they try and recoup some money.
Yeah,
you've also got to make sure it's a good product, or a game, I mean, as well. But yeah, that's why they were chucking so much money at it, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, and Gorilla before me and us, being a part of Gorilla, had like a really hard task. Like I love Killzone 2, and I think it did like a lot of new things first. I think it was one of those games that had a real nice like point of view. We had really nice kind of like visual effects in, decent story, some interesting like gunplay and stuff like that. But it was kind of touted as like the Halo killer, so it was really put a lot of pressure on everyone at Gorilla, to try and it was supposed to be like Sony's Halo. It was right. Let's elevate it to new heights, and I don't think that kind of like the CG visual representation, which wasn't supposed to be. This is Killzone 2. This is actual Killzone 2, but a lot of people were like mistook it for that. Basically, what it was is like the our team and a third party kind of render studio, did a trailer to capture what we were trying to. It was an easier way of visualizing what we were trying to capture, or what the team was trying to capture in terms of like the field of view, how the weapon moved and stuff like that. It wasn't supposed to be. This is actual gameplay footage, but it was obviously at a time where the lines were blurred, and obviously nowadays you've got to have like a little line on everything saying this is an in-game footage and stuff, because people have sued and whatnot since then. So
they have to analyse every single frame, don't they, in case they see something or think they've seen something. Do they?
Well, I said something on Twitter last year, or when Miles Morales got released, and there was a TV advert, Miles Morales, and he put like these little like earbuds in, like these little headphones in on the trailer. And it had small print saying the headbuds aren't available in the game, and it was just like I posted something at the time saying,
I must have missed
what
that.
world are we in? Like you've got to say like these earbuds are not available in the game, because someone's going to like sue Sony or something at some point, and that's sadly
weird.
That's the type of world that we live in now. If like if a game character's got a red jacket on, and then all of a sudden the game comes out and it's blue, someone out there will class action lawsuit the hell out of someone. It's just ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. I'll just do a few shout outs, a few people.
Yeah, no worries.
Welcome to the Indie Gamer, Mr. Joanna Dark, the Darge Knight, Judd Silly Music. Thanks for stopping in, mate. I know you're not feeling too well, so I hope you get better soon. Misuku, welcome. Marion the Mad, cheers for stopping in, and anyone else. That's it so far. But yeah, thanks for popping in, everyone. But yeah, no, you are right. Well, we got to effectively apologise because something's not going to be in the game that isn't real. Yeah,
it's crazy.
How would you say that? Oh, sorry. How would you say? Obviously, you worked on F1. Say that. Oh, sorry. How would you say? Obviously, you worked on F1. How did that